Welcome to Season 2 of the South African Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Terence Mentor, and I'm a digital marketer who's realized that since this industry is constantly changing, we need to be constantly learning. And I think the best way to learn all of the things is to talk to the people who are actually doing all of the things. So this podcast is a chance to do just that. In this episode, we dig down into the maze that is Google Ads with Dean Lurie, who has Google Ads as a specialty amongst a bunch of other marketing skills. I wanted to know what was the best way to get started with Google Ads, what most of us get wrong, and what success looks like on the platform. So let's get right into it. Here's Dean.
Hey, my name is Dean Lurie. I'm a Google Ads freelancer and coach. Grew up in Johannesburg, but I've recently moved back to Cape Town. So I've decided to make the move there. And at the moment, I'm busy freelancing, as well as training and coaching people in everything Google Ads.
Back to the mother city where you belong, back to the right place, the right part of South Africa. I'm not saying that. I have so many friends in other parts of South Africa. They are going to send me hate mail very soon. But I've been watching you and following you on LinkedIn for a while. We've been engaging back and forth for quite a few months on LinkedIn. I know you are a Google Ads specialist, but you are a little bit more broader than that. I know you spend a lot of your time working on Google AdWords and training people, but can you tell us about some of the other points of expertise in digital marketing that you might have?
Absolutely. So the way I started out in digital marketing and marketing in general was quite an interesting one. I'm very passionate about sport, and I come from a sports sponsorship background. So I always really wanted to get into sports sponsorship, and that's kind of how I got into marketing. And then COVID hit, and in my mind I was like, if these rights holders haven't leveraged their sponsorship digitally, agencies aren't going to have money to hire me. So I ended up pivoting into paid media. Obviously I've got the Google Ads expertise, but over and above that, I've done quite a bit of account management from a digital perspective, and I'm also in my free time learning and reading up about conversion rate optimization. So I can also speak to, sort of trying to optimize e-commerce sites to try to optimize their conversion rates and things of that nature. I also have a master's degree in digital marketing, so I do understand how all of the different puzzle pieces kind of fit together. It is quite a broad spectrum of knowledge, and I think that's kind of what makes me unique in terms of my knowledge base and, things like that.
You're that unicorn marketer, the T-shaped marketer that everyone's trying to find, where there's a broad base of knowledge, but also specialization. Generally, you have like specialists and people who have a general knowledge, but to have someone who has kind of both of those forms you're like the transformer of marketing guys.
Well, I love that.
Yeah, who wouldn't want to be like Optimus Prime of marketing? That would be pretty cool.
I've got a hearing aid, so a lot of people ask me if I am a robot, and ultimately I have to be.
There we go. You're halfway there. The bionic marketer. If if you ever start your own like a proper agency, that's going to be the name of the agency, I think. Okay, but let's focus in, because even though you have this wide general knowledge of marketing, Google Ads is one of those spaces where it can be super overwhelming. I mean, I've dabbled in it. I've spent a lot of time playing with it, and it can be really difficult to get started and to get a deep understanding with it, because it feels so complex and it feels so powerful. How did you get started, and how did you avoid that feeling of, oh my word, this huge kingdom I'm trying to get my way into?
So there's quite a few things. So right off the bat, before I even dig into that, Google Ads as a platform is constantly changing. So what you knew 5 years ago compared to now could be completely different. So just constantly sort of being on top of like thought leadership and things in the space is always a good start. But I was really fortunate when I made that shift into paid media. I worked for an agency called Search Kings Africa, and they had a really, really good initiation and onboarding process with tests and things like that, and training. So that was super, super helpful. When I joined the agency, I also picked up a mentor in a guy by the name of Adam Stern, and he was able to not just show me the fundamentals, but also all of the lovely things that go with marketing, the account management side, how to tell a story through data and things of that nature. So the first thing I would sort of recommend is to try find a mentor. I know you come from a family of mentors, so, I think you're pretty much sorted.
I'm there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to say, because so much of digital marketing for me has been just kind of teaching myself on the fly as I need to work out a skill. I go and Google it myself, and I've worked it out along the way. It seems to be with Google AdWords, it does help, like you say, to have someone showing you the ropes, some coursework to kind of get you started, to get that groundwork going. But from there, because it's changing, you've had to develop your own skills, I'm guessing?
Absolutely. So again, for example, like I said, in my free time, I'm learning about conversion rate optimization, because in a few years' time, just being a Google specialist isn't really going to cut the mustard. So what I always sort of recommend when you're starting out is get the fundamentals right. So like you said, if you are sort of YouTubing and sort of doing it yourself, what I always like to do is I build out a dummy Google Ads account, and then just don't link my credit card to the ads account. So then that way it won't spend. And then what you can ultimately do is have a look online, look on Reddit, try find examples of problems that other specialists have had, and then try build out for yourself ultimately. So that would be really helpful. You can go and find, and that will help you get familiar with the platform, because that's also constantly changing. And then, just go and mess around with it and just start building. I think the biggest thing, especially when I deal with clients who are starting out from scratch, is that it becomes so intimidating. Just the thought of actually getting stuck in can be quite a lot. So, if you just build out your dummy account, I think that would be great. I know Google Analytics, I think it's a Google store. There is a free GA4 that everyone can use from an analytics perspective. So you can use that to kind of get to grips with the key metrics and data and be comfortable with data, and ultimately having that common thread to kind of weave through the data. And then, like I said, there are software, PPC software that you can use, but like Student, but that's ultimately quite expensive. So that's where I came up with the dummy account. And then the worldwide PPC community is great. What I've noticed is, regardless of where you are, people just want to share information. So follow all of your thought leaders on LinkedIn. And what I like to do is I set up a separate Gmail just to sign up for newsletters. And then if I know I'm reading at least, whether it's Search Engine Land or Search Engine Journal, if I'm reading one newsletter a day, then I know I'm at least keeping up with what's going on in the industry. So that's kind of the advice that I would give if you're just starting out.
So I must say, as you're speaking, it's like, this sounds like a sportsman who has taken the discipline of training and practice and doing the basics right from the very beginning, and repetitions over and over again. You've taken those kind of forms of improvement, and you've kind of brought it across where, like you say, it's the daily thing. It's daily following your thought leaders on LinkedIn. It's daily reading up on the latest newsletters. I can't believe I have never thought of having a newsletter only Gmail account. That is, if there's one thing that I take away from this, I'm sure there'll be a lot, but there's one thing I take away that I actually implement, it is going to be that, because you get all these newsletters plus your normal mail all mixed up. It's a bit overwhelming. But when you have a half an hour or 15 minutes to sit down and actually read through something, to have it all in your inbox on that separate space, that is absolute genius. Let's move on though, because it's great to know how you got started, how you got that fundamentals going, and how you keep yourself fresh. But you do deal with people who don't have that expertise and that experience and that training. and who may have, people like myself who may have dabbled in AdWords and have made some big mistakes along the way that you might have to come in and correct. What are some of those common mistakes that you see happening over and over again with noobs like myself?
Sure. So I audit a lot of Google Ads accounts, and this can be anywhere from really big brands all the way to small businesses, solopreneurs sort of doing their own thing. And I've sort of made there's a sort of a key list of key common things that I sort of pick up in audits. So again, incorrect conversion tracking setup. This is super, super common. I find it all the time. For example, someone tracking page views or button clicks, for example. A lot of people wouldn't necessarily know that, if you're tracking in an iframe, you're only necessarily tracking the button click and you're not tracking the lead itself. So you could also have a situation where in platform you're double counting because you're essentially tracking the same conversion twice. So in theory, your data looks super, super great and super, super nice, but that's one of the biggest things that I sort of find pretty often. Incorrect bidding strategies as a result of the incorrect data from not having conversion tracking set up correctly. So having a sort of a value-based bidding strategy or conversion-based bidding strategy when your conversion tracking isn't set up correctly. And then what will happen is Google's AI will think it's doing a great job, and then in hindsight, you're not actually optimizing for the best conversions. Disapproved product feeds in e-commerce accounts, I find that super, super common. People just think it's easy to just upload a merchant center feed and then boom, you're sorted. But Google takes this sort of stuff super seriously. Putting 50 to 100 keywords in an ad group, that's super, super common.
Because we're targeting everyone and everything all the time.
Absolutely. And I think best practice is typically around 15 to 20 high-performing keywords. So you kind of want to start off with the base and then narrow it down ultimately. So I have situations that people don't understand why their ads aren't serving, and it's because you just can't bid on all of these keywords at once, given how many keywords you have in such a small budget. Also, I've seen quite common, say you've got a 10 grand budget, people want to try target the whole of South Africa, where in hindsight you could probably target the whole of the southern suburbs or Sandton with that kind of budget. Then last couple is just listening to all of Google's recommendations. So
I've done that. That's why I'm like, I just click up, yes, do that. Yes, do that.
Yeah. So what a lot of people don't realize is that Google's ultimate responsibility is to make revenue for their shareholders. It's not to the advertiser who's using the product. So those recommendations, if you don't know what you're doing, could give you a situation where you're just spending unnecessarily. So yeah, try to take those with a pinch of salt and only apply the recommendations you feel that will actually make a difference to your account.
That would make sense. I guess we're so used to thinking of Google as our buddy, as our partner in this endeavor. It is easy to forget that their job is to get as much cash out of you as possible. So be wary with those recommendations. That is hilarious how you have called me out on so many clear errors that I've made. But again, are these mistakes that you've seen happen? Are these some mistakes that maybe you did earlier on in your career and you've learned from that? Or did someone come in and say, please avoid these things?
It's a combination of both. I think, like I said, having a good sort of induction system and a good mentor in place sort of helped with that. But again, the thing about Google Ads is that you can learn a lot of the theory, but until you're actually driving the car, you're not really going to know how to drive it correctly. So yeah, I have made some of these mistakes before. I had a really interesting situation once where I listened to a Google rep, and yeah, the budget just exploded. We weren't converting, and I just remember in the past just having the same meeting, and she's like, don't you want to just test it? And in hindsight, I realized, okay, well, this isn't working. Clearly, you're just sort of getting us to spend more. So, I think that's the biggest thing, is that with Google, the way it's so automated now, you have its advantages where someone who doesn't really know can sort of set stuff up simply, but at the same time you lose control, and that's kind of where those issues kind of come in. So, I think even if you don't necessarily know that much, rather get those fundamentals right and learn as you go along. Instead of just sort of using Google to guide you, use what you know and your understanding to guide you. That would be the best sort of advice I can give there.
Yeah. Trust yourself that you know your brand and your audience better than Google might know them. I was thinking that it would be great to just go through all of these like terminologies and jargon around Google Ads, but then I realized we would be here till about we would be here for about 4 or 5 hours if we went through each one. So my recommendation is to follow Dean on LinkedIn to get more like in-depth information. I'll put a link to his LinkedIn in the show notes. The one thing I did think we could maybe spend a little bit of time on is talking about keywords. You mentioned keywords earlier, and that 50 is too much. That there's a sweet spot of around 15. So how would a person go about selecting those keywords? Do you have a process for that of choosing the hottest keywords for a particular campaign?
Yeah, of course. So I think before I delve into that, I think it's just important to differentiate between a search query and a search keyword. So essentially how your Google ad in the search campaign shows up is that ultimately I, as the user, type in shoes or Nike shoes. You then bid on the keyword, and if that keyword has relevancy for the search query that I'm looking at, it triggers the ad. So just because you sort of bid on a specific keyword doesn't mean that it will necessarily trigger the right search query. So that's something to just take into account before you even get into it. So just to have that differentiation. But essentially, my keyword research process doesn't just involve keywords, it also involves ad copy, because ultimately what I like to do is build out my campaigns in an Excel doc, which I think can be quite useful for people. So you can break it down by campaign, by ad group, keywords, and then you have your ad copy per ad group. So what I do before I even get into the keywords, I look at the client's website or your website. I would look to see what keywords are embedded in the website, because ultimately if your SEO matches your SEM, it will drive your cost per click down. What you can also look at from that perspective is how the client has actually put across specific USPs of the product and things of that nature. And it's also just important to know where you're going to send traffic to. So is someone going to buy my product if I'm going to send them to the homepage? That's something that you've got to consider even before you start looking at keywords. So what I typically like to do is use sort of search tools. In Google Ads, there's Keyword Planner, but you can also use Google Trends for like a more sort of macro view as well. So what I'll typically do is, if say, for example, it's a small business and you've got a small budget, and I'll touch on this probably later on in the podcast, but focus on your core key service. You want to focus on your bread and butter. Instead of just sort of spreading yourself too thin with too many services, focus on what brings in the most money and the most leads to begin with. Google Keyword Planner can give you an idea of what your lowest and your highest CPCs are for that keyword. And then you can kind of just take it from there. Am I looking at very specific keywords to go with my budget? Am I looking at very broad intent keywords? It all kind of just depends. Then what I would do is have a sort of baseline of sort of keywords, see if there is search volume. So again, Google Keyword Plan as well as Google Trends can show you keyword volumes over a few months. You can sort of be more specific in terms of the locations. And then you can kind of just take it from there. But what I also like to do is, before you sort of build out, also just Google the keywords you're thinking of looking at and look at the competition. Because you could be working in an industry like, say, accounting, for example, where there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ads on a page, and then you know that, okay, maybe as a small business this isn't necessarily working. And also by doing that, you can also get a sense of what other competitors are using in terms of USPs, ad copy, that sort of stuff. And essentially I take all of that information together, and then, like I said, I'll put it into an Excel doc with your campaign level ad group level, keywords, assets, URL. So you've pretty much built it out already, and then it's a case of just copying and pasting over into the platform.
So that's interesting because you spend, it seems, most of the time outside of Google Ads. Like you're not actually in the Google Ads tool itself for most of that work that you're doing. It's a lot of, like you're saying, focusing on the website, focusing on what competitors are doing. A lot of research seems to go into it. Do you also need, for some of your clients, is there a lot of helping them maybe adjust their website to be more SEO and SEM friendly? Is there a lot of that sort of work where you have a landing page that has nothing to do with what we're trying to achieve? How much time do you tend to spend on that aspect where you're literally trying to help them develop their landing pages?
So one of the best bits of advice I was ever given was your website is the only salesperson that grafts for you 24/7. So you as the Google specialist can write the best ads in the world, but if people are dropping off your site, then it's not going to matter how good the Google ads are, it's not going to work. So they kind of go hand in hand. So when I do that initial research, I don't just look at it from a keyword perspective. I'll go through the whole website, I'll go through the actual user journey to see where the stickiness is on the website. So for example, like I said earlier, can you track lead forms in an iframe? Is the checkout process too clunky and doesn't help? Is the load time and the load speed, are your images too clunky? And then your website is too slow. Those are all things to take into account when you're doing keyword research. So in a way, you are doing keyword research, but there's all of these other sort of things that go into it. It's not just as straightforward as that, because any specialist worth their salt will have a look at the site and how it functions, because if that's not going to work, then it's almost like hitting your head against a wall, I guess.
And I guess what also can happen with a lot of sites is that people want it to look great and they wanted to have all these functionalities without maybe thinking about the user experience and how it's going to be perceived by Google, by the Google algorithm. So they need someone like you to come in and maybe be a little bit more pragmatic. Like, what do we need to get done? How do we do this in the best, cheapest, and most effective way? And I'm sure there must be some difficult conversations with people that have like, no, but I've loved this, I love this video that opens automatically, this autoplay video that's on the header of our landing page. I love it. Why do we need an H1 tag on this page? We have the video. I mean, those kind of conversations must be pretty tough to have. But I guess that's why they're hiring you. Have you had times like that where you've maybe had to pull rank with a client to say, I know what I'm talking about?
So I think the biggest thing that I like to sort of look at it is that I don't like to look at paid media as this kind of client-agency relationship or just this thing. It's more partners. And I think what a lot of people don't realize, and I think you'll see it with me specifically, is that I feel like this knowledge is power. So beyond me just doing stuff well for you, I want you as the person to understand why I'm doing this and how this works. The way I kind of base my model on is that if my mom can understand Google Ads and things like that, then anyone can. And I think that's a very big thing for me, is that there's an educational element to being a specialist. It's all good and well saying, okay, I'm really good at this, look at the numbers. But if other people don't understand what's going on, then I don't really see the point. I've had situations like that, but at the same time, I don't want to necessarily pull rank, if that makes sense. I'll try take the customer through a specific story so that they can understand. So whether, I can actually share the screen and take them through the actual account or, things of that nature. I don't just want to go and, just make results for you. I think it's very easy for someone to just go and say, hey, Mr. Customer, I'm going to go and make results for you. I want to teach people how to make results for themselves, because ultimately I see a better country and a better future that way. So yeah, I have had situations like that before, but like I said, I use it as more of a teaching kind of thing. And obviously you get some people who just don't want to know, they just want to see the numbers, and that's obviously dependent on the client. So I think you just got to, also the thing about it is that you've got to start building relationships and figure out how other people like to communicate and how they like to read data and things of that nature. And, that just comes with time in the saddle and just time with dealing with people.
So that's, I kind of get a sense that it's about building trust. And once they trust you, then you have the ability to make these recommendations that they go, well, if Dean said it, we trust that Dean's got, he's shown us that he knows what he's talking about. So let's follow his advice. Earlier on, we did talk actual cash money. We were joking that, 10,000 Rand is, a good enough budget maybe to reach a small section of one city, if you're lucky, depending on what you're actually advertising. But for a small business, and I know this is hard to do because it's so dependent on product, target audience, all this. So this isn't a fair question I'm about to ask you. I admit that. But if we did have a small business that had, let's say, you mentioned an accounting firm. It's an accounting firm. It's a small family-owned accounting firm that just works in Cape Town, and they want to target other small businesses to be their clients. What kind of budget would you estimate a client like that might need for a 6-month campaign?
Sure. So, like you said, it's not a simple question. The short answer is that there is no right answer. So, like you said, each business has their own context, their own customer sort of sales cycles, things of that nature. So, the short answer is it's not an easy answer, but I have actually put together a bit of a longer answer. So here's the longer answer. So first of all, never allocate more budget to Google Ads than you can afford to potentially lose, especially in the beginning phases. The reason I say that is because of my next point. Be prepared for the possibility of no immediate ROI within the first month, but also be mindful that the first 3 months are purely for collecting data and purely for trying to see if the original strategy has actually worked. And in paid media, data is gold. And that's what I ultimately sort of always go back to, is I'm not just going to thuck and just say, oh, let's do this. You need to use the data to guide you, otherwise you're making sort of irrational decisions. So that's super, super important. Going back to what I said earlier, focus on that key service or core product that you're focusing on. So let's say it's a plumber. You've got draining, you've got pipe renewal, you've got all of those other different products. Focus on your bread and butter. Focus on nailing one thing right and getting it right first. And then once you've done that, then you can branch out and try conquer other avenues. So again, focus on historically what's done well for your business in the past, and also focus on the areas where you've gotten the most business. So become a bigger fish in a smaller pond, or as opposed to becoming a smaller fish in a bigger pond. That's ultimately how I look at it. Getting down into the nitty-gritty, you want to aim for a minimum of at least 10 clicks a day per campaign. So let's assume you're bidding on a keyword with an average first page bid of 5 Rand a day, 10 clicks a day, that works out to what? 50 Rand a day. 50 Rand a day, you take an average of 30.4 days in a month, that works out to about, 1,500 a month, around there? So that's per campaign. Say you're running 5 campaigns, or you just times that by 5, and then you get your monthly budget. So what you can also look to do is use that as a starting point, as a baseline for those first 3 months, and then be willing to be flexible. So again, Google is going to give you data, and based on how that first 3 months of spend goes, you can say, right, in the first 3 months, we did this right, we did this right, we did this right, but this didn't work, and this didn't work. So you can use that first 3 months as almost like a learning period, and then you can take it from there. So again, maybe your targeting is too broad, you can bring it in a little. And those are other things you can do if you're not prepared to put in more budget. So try optimize for where you're getting the most leads, and just be flexible with it. There is no silver bullet here. If there was, I think we'd all be schmillionaires. So I think that's just kind of where I'm at. Just make sure that you've accounted for that 3-month sort of data collection period. And then I think the biggest thing as well is to just make sure that you're aligned with what you're looking to achieve. Because if people are just throwing money at a problem and they don't know what the problem is, then it's not really going to work out.
What I really love about both answers, the short and the long answers, is that I often feel that agencies or specialists tend to want to make these like unreasonable promises or these guarantees that cannot be fulfilled. And the reality is, it's business. There are no real guarantees in whatever business, whatever kind of business you're doing. And I also like the fact that it's a slow burn. You're not going to press start on the campaign today and see results in an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. It's going to take a long time. The idea that there's three things you can choose. It can be fast, cheap, or good. And if you're working with a small budget, it's not going to be fast, but it might be good. But that's what you have to deal with. So that feels like such a wise way of doing it, and my hope is that when people are listening to this, they're actually feeling a little bit of relief, because it actually means that there's not so much pressure on the digital marketer to suddenly perform miracles if the client can understand, hey, it's a 3-month learning curve, and even after those 3 months, every single month you're optimizing more and more and more if you're willing to partner up and do the actual work of optimizing as we recommend. Let's end with this because I like the idea of figuring out what success looks like. And you've worked on numerous campaigns, so maybe you can give us an idea of how do you know that you've won at Google Ads? What does success look like? In your sports world, it's very easy. You're the guy holding the trophy at the end. They don't have Google Ad trophies. So how do you know you're winning?
So I think it's also a very broad question that you've asked. So I'm going to give it from different perspectives. So for some people, it's title-based. So like you said, if you're in agency, how quickly did I climb the ladder and what big brands did I work with? How much spend did I spend each quarter versus how much revenue did I bring in? It's very sort of numbers driven, Other people, it's like, okay, how quickly can I make money? How quickly can I get to like 100K billing in a month kind of thing? It's monetary driven. Digital marketing and paid media as a byproduct is super, super stressful as an industry. And so success in Google Ads for other people might be defining success as having a good work-life balance, working remotely, setting boundaries with clients and not necessarily burning out. That could be success for a lot of people. Something that I learned growing up, which I'll never really ever forget, I was doing my honours thesis, and Dr. Sidney Mufamadi said to me, you can't build skyscrapers on foundations that aren't strong. So ultimately, for me personally, success in Google Ads looks like you've got the fundamentals down and you've got that foundation. You've been able to implement basic best practices, correct conversion tracking setup, regular optimizing of the account, understanding how to use that data, like I said earlier, to sort of have that golden thread and sort of weave that narrative to tell a story, because ultimately it's all good and well just driving the car, but you need to be able to tell the story and simplify data for people who might not necessarily be good at data. From a client perspective, success looks like the KPIs that you set out in the beginning with the client. So have we generated the right number of good quality leads? Have we made sure that there's the right number of return on our ad spend from an e-commerce perspective? But ultimately, regardless of whether you're freelancing, whether you're an agency, it doesn't really matter. That's something that you really need to focus on is, what is our North Star? What are we looking to achieve? Let's agree on those KPIs and work together towards getting towards those KPIs. Because ultimately, if you don't have that North Star, both you and the client are going to get super confused. And yeah, you need to have that shared vision and that shared understanding of where we're looking to go.
A big thank you to Dean for his time and expertise, and a big thank you to you for listening to this episode of the SA Digital Marketing Podcast. You can follow Dean on LinkedIn for some more deep insights on Google Ads. I'll put a link to his profile in the show notes. If you're listening on Spotify, please leave a comment in the app and I'll respond to you there. Otherwise, you can send your thoughts, opinions, and questions to podcast@tmdigital.co.za. That's T for Tango, M for Mother, digital.co.za. And of course, please don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen, just to make sure you don't miss out on the next episode. Thanks so much. This was the SA Digital Marketing Podcast.